So several months ago, I made a video talking about a few moments where Pokemon has gotten very adult, and that video has since become one of my most viewed of all time. As such, I am here not only to say thank you for the amazing support on that video, but to do it again. So without further ado, here are 10 more times that Pokemon stepped out of its family-friendly form and got very adult. The Pokemon manga is probably the most overlooked aspect of the franchise by the general fanbase, despite having been around for as long as the games have been. In the 10th chapter of the Pokemon Adventures manga, called Danger, High Voltorb, there is one particular panel where we see Red looking at a newspaper, where an article titled, "Shocking Case of Poke-Love" can be seen. The headline of this article reads, "That's the last bath I'll take with my Tentacool," and, well, yeah, that is an image I did not need in my head. The Pokemon manga tends to have a lot of very risque moments, so as out of character as this might seem for Pokemon, it's actually pretty par for the course for the manga, if you can believe it. The manga isn't the only part of the franchise that tends to get kinda dirty though, as the anime has also partaken in this kind of stuff as well. One particular example comes from an episode in the X and Y arc titled A Keeper for Keeps, where Bonnie, a young child mind you, says this about her older brother Clement, quote, "He likes to take off his shirt and wrap himself in an Arbok." I can't believe I'm saying this, but it seems like it's actually a trend that people tend to get a little too friendly with their Pokemon, and that is kind of concerning. Granted, in this instance, it was actually a scenario made up by Bonnie, who was trying to make Lilia, another character in the episode, not like her brother so much since the two were talking about getting married. So, I mean, it's technically not real, I guess, but regardless, this has got to be one of the weirdest moments in the anime ever, and one that does not put a very good image in my head. So we've touched on the manga and anime so far, but the games also have their fair share of adult moments as well. The nugget item that's been in the games since Pokemon Red and Blue is known in Japan as a golden ball, which also just so happens to be a Japanese slang term for, well, testicles. This naturally would result in a dirty joke being made practically any time a nugget was present, and one particularly iconic moment amongst the Japanese fanbase occurs in Pokemon Gold and Silver, where a man on Route 2 offers the player his golden balls. This seems to be a pretty deliberate dirty joke on Game Freak's part, which is kinda surprising given Pokemon's more family-friendly nature. I will have to admit though, I probably would have gotten a kick out of it had something like this been in the English version. The in-game adult moments aren't just reserved for the Japanese versions of the game though, as plenty of innuendos have been snuck into the English versions as well. For example, in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, if you go to the Moss Deep City Space Center and talk to one of the female NPCs looking at the model rocket in the lobby, she will say, "This rocket, thick." And that is literally a word-for-word quote. I don't think anybody would be describing an actual rocket as thick unless they were trying to hint at something, if you know what I mean. So this seems to be an example of the localizers trying to have a little bit of fun with NPC dialogue. And I mean, if nothing else, it certainly made this NPC a heck of a lot more memorable. It's not just about the dirty jokes though, because sometimes Pokemon can get dark and graphic. Swinging back into the Pokemon Adventures manga, in the 23rd chapter, titled Make Way for Magmar, there is a moment where Giovanni is involved in a battle against a Magmar. Towards the end of the battle, he has his Cloyster freeze the Magmar, which is pretty standard for a Pokemon battle, but what isn't standard is what comes next. Afterwards, Giovanni commands Cloyster to finish it, to which Cloyster splits the Magmar, still frozen, in half, effectively killing it, and in an extremely graphic manner, no less. There are plenty of other moments in the manga as well, where Pokemon are cut in half and impaled, some of which I talked about in that first video on this topic if you want to check that out to learn more. Back to the anime, one of my personal favorite anime moments occurs in the episode The School of Hard Knocks. In this episode, Ash, Brock, and Misty run into a Pokemon trainer school and get introduced to one of its students, named Giselle. Upon seeing a picture of Giselle, our main man Brock gets smitten and says, "She can violate my rights anytime." Even though this isn't inherently dirty, it's still a pretty strong thing to say in a show like Pokémon, and it'll make you raise your eyebrows if you're not prepared for it. And the way that Brock says this is pretty hilarious too. What's crazy though is that this isn't even the half of it, because this moment is even more adult in the Japanese version, where Brock instead says, "I'll look forward to her in 8 years." If Brock wanting his rights violated didn't get your concern, then this definitely should, because although it does come from the original Japanese version, it does toe quite a line and is pretty funny that it even made it into the show in the first place. Believe it or not though, this is not actually the only time that Brock has said this when talking about a girl. In the episode Double Trouble Header, Brock and the gang meet a girl named Casey, and while in the English dub, Brock simply wonders if Casey has an older sister, Brock says in the original version that Casey would be a lot of fun in 8 years. We obviously all know that Brock is girl crazy, but I don't think any of us realized just how girl crazy. Going back to the games, another curious innuendo occurs in Pokemon X and Y. One of the game's more memorable moments is the fireworks scene at Parfum Palace. If you are playing as a boy, Shauna will remark that she's never watched fireworks alone with a boy before, clearly setting the stage that this is supposed to be somewhat romantic, which is reflected through the rest of the cutscene. After the fireworks are over though, just before you are able to leave, the palace's butler will come to have a chat with you and give you the TM for protect, which seems to be just a little too well timed given the context of everything that just happened. When putting together this video, I definitely tried to exclude things that just involved someone looking at it the wrong way, or that might be a stretch, but this one to me seems just a little too convenient, if you know what I mean. Next, we go back once again to the anime, and this one isn't so much adult as it is just hilarious, but I still think it's worth a mention. In the episode Hassle in the Castle, Jesse and James find themselves in an interesting predicament as they are complaining of a rash as they run into Ash, Misty, and Brock. They then proceed to go into a modified version of their motto about this rash, which begins with Jesse saying, "To protect us from all that chafing and itching," to which James follows up with, "It might finally stop all of Jesse's complaining." It doesn't take a detective to realize that James wanted to say something other than complaining, but Pokemon is a kid's show after all, so he had to make do. I don't know about you guys, but this is the kind of moment that really makes me appreciate the earlier days of Team Rocket, because they were pulling this kind of stuff all the time, and it was amazing. And finally, we of course have to end with one of the most infamous adult moments in the series history, the anime episode Beauty and the Beach. Now, I'm not going to be talking about this, because this moment is pretty well known at this point, but there was another part of this episode that, well, happened, and that's what we're gonna highlight here. One of the characters that the gang meets in this episode is an old guy named Mo, and he takes a particular liking to Misty, stating that he's looking forward to 8 years from now in the original Japanese version. Now, it's one thing if Brock says something like this, since he's just a teenager anyway, but an old guy saying this to Misty of all people is some next level stuff for what is supposed to be a kid's show that could really only come from Japan. It's no surprise that between this and the incident, that this episode was banned outside of Asia for a while before being dubbed into English in a heavily edited format. And those were a few more times where Pokemon got very adult. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new, and check out the first video on this subject if you haven't yet. You can also support the channel greatly, which is very much appreciated, by listening to my Pokemon remixes on Spotify, and by watching my Pokemon Cardinal series here on YouTube if you haven't yet. With that said, I will see you all soon with another video, and until then, as always, I love you all, and I will smell you guys later.